Good afternoon, everybody. How you all doing? So I'm going to talk today about clean energy, large-scale clean energy supply to decarbonize particularly the steel industry, but in general, large-scale industrial applications, right? And why steel, right? So why steel is because, as you know, steel accounts for about probably 9% or so of global steel CO2 emissions. And the industry is under pressure to decarbonize. So they're certainly, what we see from them is a set of customers for us who are, who have big drivers to decarbonize. And what they're really hungry for is actually the supply of hydrogen or the supply of CO2 capture. So what I'm going to talk about is large-scale supply and catering to a customer like a steel industry. Just as background, Linde, I work for Linde. We are an industrial gas company, global footprint, with a sales of about $33 billion. We are in about 100 countries. And we are a big supplier of hydrogen today. We have a $3 billion business in hydrogen globally today, supplying about 8,000 tons a day. We operate 150 steam methane reformers. We operate about 80 electrolyzers, so a lot of experience in supplying hydrogen to a variety of customers. But the challenge is that most of the hydrogen we do today, of course, is gray. It's coming from reforming natural gas in most cases. But looking forward, we are trying to decarbonize ourselves. We are trying to decarbonize our own footprint, but also cater to customers like the steel industry that I'm going to talk about a little bit, as to how to assist in decarbonizing them. So we have a mission to decarbonize ourselves and a mission to decarbonize our customers. And in that regard, we already have like a $2 billion backlog of projects we are working on today with customers to do this decarbonization. And we expect that to grow over the next few years, $8 to $10 billion investment in the next 2 to 3 years, and about $50 billion to be invested over the next decade, right? This is what we see based on the types of customers we are seeing. So that's kind of a little bit of background on the company. Now, just in terms of one of the main focus when we talk about large-scale supply, right? We have heard a lot of talk today about electrolyzers and catering to individual needs. The way we think about it is networks. Networks are super important for large-scale industrial customers. And what you see on this picture here is, on the bottom left, is a picture of our Gulf Coast hydrogen network. So along the Gulf, in the Houston area and so forth, we operate about a 600-mile pipeline of hydrogen today, supplying a variety of refinery customers. And what you see on top near the Chicago area is another set of pipelines that we operate, serving a lot of the industrial steel customers in particular, right? Now, I wish both those things were together, but actually they're separated. One is in the north, one is in the south. But long term, in terms of achieving reliable supply, this is the kind of network that we believe is going to be required in order to enable large-scale supply to industrial customers. The viability of a single source, single customer model really is not economical and very difficult to realize. So this is just a mindset of how we think about it in terms of density, in terms of large-scale supply with multiple users and multiple feed points into a pipeline network. Just talking about steel, I don't want to go too much detail into this, but I just want to highlight that there are several ways to make steel today, right? The first row you see there is called an integrated steel mill, which starts with iron ore, and then it reduces that with coke. And the coke is what creates all the CO2 emissions. And the idea is, how do you remove and substitute the coke with hydrogen? And unfortunately, for that first set, the first pathway which you see on top there, which has a CO2 emission of about 2 tons of CO2 for every ton of steel that is produced. So how do you reduce that? And unfortunately, you cannot really replace all the coke with hydrogen. It's just not possible to do it, right? Because the process doesn't work. So if you really want to go to a 100% hydrogen-based route, you got to switch to the second pathway, which is shown on that slide, which is called the DRI plant. So if you're an integrated steel maker today, you really, and you want to go to net zero, you have to kind of switch your production route and switch to the DRI production, okay? And this is one of the fundamental things that we are engaged with a lot of customers to decide how do you switch to that natural gas or hydrogen-based reduction and then decarbonize the route. But the main point I want to make here is just the scale required. So a 2 million ton steel plant requires 1 gigawatt scale of hydrogen for it to work, right? So we're talking about a gigawatt scale hydrogen requirement for a 2 million ton steel plant, which is quite typical. And that they will have to not only change the processing route, but also employ these kind of large scale hydrogen supply. The last route shown on the slide here is the mini mill, which is the scrap recycling. And they actually can electrify. They really don't need hydrogen as much. And if they can get clean electricity, they can really decarbonize. But this is a recycling route, which is very prevalent here in the US. So the main point I want to convey on this slide is that these steel mills require about, a gigawatt scale or 600 tons per day of hydrogen for each steel mill. And that's what we are trying to discuss with customers. How do you get this? So from our perspective, steel makers can do many things to try to lower their carbon footprint. But from the Linde standpoint, we think of it in 4 things. The first is, of course, large-scale hydrogen supply, which is the focus of what I'm talking about here. And we look at green hydrogen as well as blue hydrogen. And actually, in the next couple slides, I'm going to focus more on blue hydrogen because that is available at scale and at cost compared to green, in our opinion, right? Green hydrogen, from our standpoint, we are focusing on both. Linde, we are not necessarily married to one technology or the other. And the same with electrolyzers. For example, today, we are working on about 400 megawatt of electrolyzer projects. Not one project, multiple projects, which total about 400 megawatts. So we have a lot of experience in actually building out new electrolysis projects. But many of them are catering more to mobility and smaller applications. If you think about large-scale supply again, which is the focus of this discussion, we really think more about blue rather than green. So that's one thing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The second thing, which is also very important for decarbonizing an industrial segment like steel or cement, for that matter, is CO2 capture. CO2 capture is important not only for making blue hydrogen, of course that's required, but in addition, CO2 capture can be applied directly to the steel mill or directly to the cement plant and decarbonize. And that actually can be more cost effective than hydrogen. So in terms of competition, you got to think, can hydrogen compete with CCS? Can hydrogen compete with alternatives? And that's one of the alternatives to consider. So I'll focus a little bit on both these hydrogen supply and CO2 capture. And in CO2 capture, we have 2 technologies. I'll talk about both of them a little bit going forward. So why blue hydrogen compared to green? The first one is scale and readiness today, right? The picture you see here is a autothermal reformer, ATR, that we have running in Clear Lake, Texas, right? This produces about 150 million feet a day of hydrogen and would be very, let's say, compatible with supplying a steel mill. So this is ready today. It's available at the large scale that a steel industry requires. And to get electrolyzers to this scale is still a challenge from what we are seeing. So that's one of the reasons why we are really focusing on blue hydrogen as a solution for large-scale supply. This particular plant is not serving a steel mill. It's serving actually a chemical plant. The second reason is cost, right? On the left-hand side, you see, these are, again, very indicative numbers. Everybody is very focused on hydrogen costs and so forth. Don't take these numbers to the bank, right? But it's just to show you that the graph on the right is a lot lower than the graph on the left, right? The graph on the left is green hydrogen cost, which is primarily dependent on the cost of renewable power, right? So, and generally, you need to get really low in terms of cost of renewable power to compete. And typically, a steel industry or most of these industrial customers are looking for hydrogen below $2 a kilogram, right? Much below that. So the point I want to make on this slide is the graph on the right is a lot lower than the graph on the left, and that's why blue hydrogen generally tends to be much more favorable for industrial customers. Okay. I'll switch a little bit to CO2 capture, right? CO2 capture, as I said, is integral to make blue hydrogen, but it's also useful to just capture CO2 directly from industrial customers. And what you see here are two different technologies. Linde offers both of these. On the left is what we call amine systems, amine wash systems, which are well known in the industry. So I won't talk much about that because that is already, let's say, I'm assuming many people are familiar with amine technology. On the right-hand side is HISORP. HISORP is an absorbent-based technology where you can absorb the CO2 coming off a flue gas or coming off a syngas, and then you can separate it that way. The advantage of this HISORP technology compared to the traditional amine wash is that it doesn't require any amine solutions, so no chemicals required, and also it just requires clean power, right? It doesn't require any steam generation, so there are no secondary emissions to take care of. So if you want to decarbonize a solution for CO2 capture, this HISORP adsorbent technology can be more appropriate. Of course, every case is different, and we have to look at the plus and minus in the situation. But the HISORP adsorbent-based systems can be pretty powerful for a steel mill type of system. And this, for example, is a picture, because people are less familiar about this absorbent-based systems, is a picture of this HISORP technology, which we have been running for over a decade from a steel mill in India. And we have done some others, but this particular picture is from an installation. So the point I'm trying to make is this HISORP adsorbent-based CO2 capture is also a very powerful approach to decarbonizing a large industrial segment. So finally, the way we think about it, just to sort of close the loop, is how do you de-risk decarbonize? As I mentioned, a customer like a steel industry requires very large-scale supply, and it requires significant investment. And from our viewpoint, from Linde's viewpoint, we think of it in two ways. On the left side of this chart, what you see is the concept of networks, right? That our thing is that we would own and operate such facilities where we supply hydrogen or CO2 capture as a service, and we bring value by combining density. It could be not necessarily tied to one single customer, but really to tie it in with multiple customers. That's what I'm trying to show on the left-hand side of this chart. And on the right-hand side is our business model. Our business model is really not to sell an electrolyzer or not to sell a CO2 capture system, but we would invest, we would operate, we would own it. And this takes away the risk, the financial investment risk for the customer. It takes away the technical risk for the customer. This is all new technology. CO2 capture is new, hydrogen supply is new. So if we, as experts knowing this, can invest and operate, it de-risks this from the customer. The customer doesn't have to become an expert in CO2 capture, or the customer doesn't have to become an expert in hydrogen supply, right? We are taking that risk over a long-term contract period. So this is, I think, that's what I had. So thank you for the attention, and I think my time is up. I don't know if you have time for questions, but I'm available otherwise to meet outside. Thank you.